this morning. I said I partook in deliberate joy to start the year off, and went away.
Love
and
that.
Came back looking forward on the flight back. Landed this morning looking forward to this conversation because I'm such a fan of you. So this is a great way to start the year.
Likewise. Yes, I love this idea of deliberate joy. I might actually write that down.
Yeah.
When I did my New Year's reflections, I did like things that I want to add back into the year, and I wrote something like meaningful moments and adding in just more moments of joy because I realized,
I used it in an email this morning, and we do this with our own Insta stories, and we do it with our own emails. When we write something, we're like, oh, that's so good. I wrote this out, and I'm like, there was an email that came, and I go, delayed response due to deliberate joy. And I was like, oh, yes, please, more of that. Love it. Yes.
Yes. Mindfulness with Lynn.
I'm
with you.
How are you? How are you?
I'm good. I wasn't in St. Lucia for the last 5 days.
In your product.
And actually, I was in, yes. If you look at the gray window, I was in this grayness, but all good. We had a good break. It was actually nice to get like a real break over the holidays. I took a couple of days and we just had, I don't know, it was a more low-key holiday. I think COVID changed everything. I used to feel like there was like a constant of like event or party or party or party.
Part of the question I want to talk to you about. How are you jumping ahead into the management?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hold that thought. For those who don't know you, let's do an intro. This is Lisa. You are the founder of Sahajan, and Sahajan is an Ayurvedic-based skincare line that really is rooted in the fundamental elements of Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is a 5,000-year-old tradition that you've really taken from being just based on tradition, but really infused and brought the elements of science, which has been part of it all along, but you've really brought that as as kind of a genesis of your brand and how you're introducing it to customers and consumers. Is that a fair way to do an intro of just one aspect of you?
My God. Yes and yes. And I love that you described it. See, I should have brought a notebook to take down words. Like you said, the genesis of the brand. I love the word genesis. But yeah, that's you exactly have it. Like Ayurveda is this 5,000-year-old science. We see people dipping their toes into it all the time, and not just South Asians, like broadly across wellness. And so I knew that in order to bring people to Ayurveda from a skincare perspective, I needed to give them the science. Because that's typically, like even with like meditation, like people bought into meditation, but when they really started seeing the data around meditation, people got into it. And so that's same.
So for those who are part of your community, who might be joining, who are like, and you are, so. So my name is Bharti.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm an entrepreneur of three different businesses. Serial entrepreneur. A word that we're questioning as whether it's something I want to own or not anymore. Park that aside. But the reason we have these conversations and with other founders is I'm the founder of Brown Girl Angels. It is a angel investing collective, but really beyond just writing checks, we're about learning, mentoring, and investing in Canadian female founders who are primarily South Asian. And so part of what I've started is just conversations with Canadian founders and starting that and just, how and the how of it, the why of it, and how the F of all of it is really what we're talking about. So.
Amazing. I just want to say I smiled because I think Lily's the best cleanser so far.
I was going to say, actually, I know, I should have held the product and said that. I came home last night, 2 a.m., and put on the face oil before we went to bed. I'm like, that's my reset to like separate travel to starting the year. So to set the tone for the conversation, because there's so much to talk about when it comes to a founder, all the different elements. I really had to give some thought to what is the best use of this time. And for the time of year that it is, new habits, I'm not using the dreaded R word. It's a year of new habits, year of new vision boarding. It's a year of new, am I where I want to be? Intentions. So for folks who are out there who are maybe in recalibration mode, maybe in re-energizing mode, maybe in resetting of intentions mode, it's helpful for someone who's accomplished what you have so far. And I say so far because there's so much more to come. To take it back to the beginning of you're a pharmaceutical executive, you're in the corporate track, and this doesn't happen overnight. How did this happen? So can you take us back to you're in pharma, and then what were like those first beginning inklings of Sahajan? Or maybe it wasn't Sahajan. Or maybe it wasn't Sahajan. Maybe it was something else. Can you take us back to that?
Yeah. I'll take you back to that because there's probably, I don't know if there's the in-between part, but I will tell it to you anyway, which is I'm in pharma. I'm working in big pharma at the time. So I finished school. I worked for a smaller Swiss-based biotech, and then I moved and I worked for J&J in their biotech division. And so when I worked for J&J, I was working on J&J's biggest biotech brand. You know, I think at the time in Canada, let's call it $100 million brand. Like, it was a big brand. And my first foray into entrepreneurship was leaving that role to start my own consulting practice.
Yeah.
And it was a big, big, big deal. So I had it's like a whole other probably Instagram Live about why I left, but I was very motivated to be out on my own. There was like a multitude of things happening at the same time, and one of which was I went to McMaster. They had invited me back to do like a session, and then one of the students was like, can you come do that at my company? And I was like, I can. I actually have a full-time job. And then somebody else was like, hey, you know, IBM was wondering if you could come in. And I was like, well, I'm working, you know. So all of a sudden I was like, well, maybe I could re-envision what I'm doing, because I was on this very, very specific corporate path. And so I left pharma, which to me in some ways was the biggest leap, because here I was, you know, I was in my early 30s. I always, like, I joke, and my parents will remember this, like, I had a corporate car, and it was a company BMW, which, like, you know, was like the daughter of my parents, like, she's driving a BMW. And so I gave that back. And so for like a year, I took the bus everywhere. And I created this consulting practice, and it had very specific focus. So we did a lot of consulting work back to pharma. So a lot of strategy work, developing a marketing plans, developing all of that kind of stuff. So I helped Bayer launch their ophthalmology drug. It was one of like the biggest projects I took on, because that took on for years. So we did a ton of stuff in that. We did a lot of work in leadership development, because at the time, corporations were saying we have these young, high potentials. How do we take these people who are succeeding, and how do we grow them within our organization? And also, who are we leaving behind, because we haven't considered sort of what our world looks like? And so Brand Girl Angels is like, you'll see where this is going. And then I ended up building a bigger practice around diversity, inclusion, the advancement of women. So it's an area of which I ended up developing like a huge specialty on. I've written on it. I wrote a paper with Reva Seth, if you know her, on how corporations it was called Mom's the Word, but it was all about how corporations can create a platform for moms to continue to be successful and grow in the corporate world. So my world was, the practice grew. You know, as things do, we started to grow in people, and the business was growing. And at the time, I thought that this was it. Like, I remember, actually, I'll tell you, I had a mentor who said to me, like, this won't be the last business that you run. And at the time, I was kind of insulted, because I thought, like, does she think I'm not going to be good at this? Like, what does she think? And then, you know, years later, exactly what she predicted would come true. And it was interesting, because at the time, so you talk about like reimagining, recalibrating, reinvesting. I remember having a point. So the business grew. I started to have kids. And then I realized that, you know, we would do better if I was working with more freelancers, so we could do more specialty work. And so somebody really wanted deep leadership work. I had someone I could bring in on that. And so it was becoming, anyways, I was going through these different iterations. And then what happened in truth was, I was like rethinking, recalibrating, just like, you know, where do I want to take this? Where do I see this 10, 15, 20 years from now? Because almost in some ways, people who consult, this isn't necessarily true, but often people who go into consulting do it in their 40s, 50s, 60s, because because I started this early, I was like, do I see myself doing this 10, 15, 20 years from now? Am I still going to be talking about this stuff? And then it was like the universe.
What I'm hearing from you, which maybe isn't true for everyone, but it sets the tone for you, was that first foray into entrepreneurship as a consultant was already successful. So there's a bit of I'm an entrepreneur. I can do this. I got this.
I can do this. It's exactly what it is. Because I don't think I could have jumped. I mean, I could, like now, like we can all do anything, but I don't know if I would have made the leap from my formal corporate job to creating a consumer product, as we talk about, because that first foray, and there were accolades along the way. You know, I was in Profit Magazine, and Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce named me Entrepreneur of the Year for that. And so I was like starting to see, and it opened me up to a new world, because when you're corporate, your whole life is corporate. And when I was really focused there, I never imagined anything else. And it's funny, because in the years that passed, I would run into people that I used to work with, and they would say things like, "Oh, are you still at home? Like, oh, it's cute. Are you picking up projects?" Like, no one had any idea of the scope. And in some ways, some of my former colleagues still don't have the scope of Sahajin, because it's when you're in corporate, you really have, sometimes not everybody does, but at least I did. I had a very sort of myopic view of what my path would be like and what success would look like. And making that shift into consulting, all of a sudden I was meeting all these amazing entrepreneurs, and I was seeing worlds differently. And I was consulting outside of pharma, so I could see like how oil and gas was working. I did a ton of work with crown corporations. I was traveling a ton.
I mean, I was going to say, I'm curious, and you'll share, where does Sahajin come into this? Like, this is all happening. You're in momentum. I assume you're a little bit in overdrive, overworking mode, because you now are also a mom at this point. So take us to Sahajin, because, I mean, that, and by the way, I think it was your life designer or someone who said that they've also started kind of the consulting work, and I feel like, I mean, that's a whole separate conversation on that, even that first move, as you've discussed your successful move. But take us to Sahajin. Like, where does Sahajin come in? How, and thank God it did, but.
Yeah. But, randomly in so many ways, because what ended up happening, so I was in consulting. I did have a young daughter. I was pregnant, and I came home, and my daughter had gotten into my skincare. Short and sweet. She had it on her face, her arms, she had it everywhere, and she looked super cute. But I remember thinking so many things. I remember thinking, like, you look cute. Oh my gosh, like you wasted a gajillion dollars. Like a good frugal mom would think. And then I remember thinking, oh my gosh, you got to take that off your skin. I have no idea what it's doing to your young, beautiful skin. And it was in that moment, so a few things happened. I took her to her room, and I said, look, if you want to play with things, these are the things you can play with. And they were little bottles of oils that my parents had recently brought back on a trip from Kerala in India. And I remember kind of standing there and explaining to her, like, these are good for you, and these are safe for you, and saying to her and thinking, okay, if my skincare isn't good enough for her, and I'm really questioning, the basis of, because everything I bought at the time was like anti-fatigue, anti-wrinkle, turn back the hands of time, like, don't look so tired. I never thought about clean, like, this is in the early days of clean and natural, and I never thought about it. And then I thought, well, wait, if this is what I trust, I should be going back here.
People have ideas.
And so it really set me on
these
a journey.
moments like you have, whether it's about food or this or that. How did you take that into actually actioning on that?
Oh, that's actually a good question. It's a great question, because it sounds great, but then it's like, how do you? So, it's funny, I go through this whole thing, and I have this idea, and I start doing a little bit of like online research again. This is the early days of clean, and particularly in Canada, if you wanted a clean product, you were at the health food store. Like, you weren't anywhere near, Shoppers even, or Sephora or anything like that. I realized, like, I wasn't using the word Ayurveda at the time. I thought of it more as family tradition, and realized kind of like it was almost like a little bit of a rediscovery, because I realized that so much of what we did as a family was steeped in Ayurveda. And then I was like, I want to do this. And like, true story, I remember like thinking it in the moment, and then coming down the stairs maybe 2 days later and saying to my husband, I'm going to start another business. And so for anybody who's watching, who's ever done this to their partner, like, I remember him putting his head down and just being like, really? Like, but this one is so good. And, here he's looking at his 9-month pregnant wife thinking, what are you about to do again? Because, the early days of consulting were hard and challenging, and getting new clients. And as I told you, like, not having was hard. And and so the first thing I would say is, like, when I told him, I knew I was doing it. Like, it wasn't like anybody could have convinced me out of it. But then I was like, how do I do it? And I didn't come from the industry, and I wouldn't recommend anybody in skincare or cosmetics to do what I did. But I was like, okay, how do we do this? And then because we both worked in pharma, I said to him, do you think you would know like anybody or anyone who could sort of help through this? And then he contacted someone. And then what I ended up doing was working with also kind of a small consulting practice, but it was a bunch of GSK chemists who were doing other pharma and biotech work, both regulatory development. And I went to them and said, I want to build this skincare line. And they weren't doing consumer packaged goods. They weren't doing skincare. They weren't doing anything with that, but formulation was right in their wheelhouse. The primary chemist that I work with in like the beginning of his career did work like early, like lotions work for like Procter and Gamble and all this kind of stuff. And so they said, okay, we'll take that on with you. And so it was a process. Like it was a real process. I sourced 2 Ayurvedic doctors in India to consult on the formulation. So the learning, which I would have not do it again, is that because I came from corporate, very pharma, very methodical, very pragmatic, and then I was a consultant, very methodical, very pragmatic. I took a very I'm gonna get the right people and the right experts, and like it
what
was
would you suggest to someone starting out? I mean, the things are advanced in that. Well, there's practically everything you can find on the internet. Is that what you suggest now? Hey, have an idea.
Yes. I would say because I didn't start to, it was only so for example, we were in formulation for almost a year. And then we went into branding. So the process, for me having that idea to launch was to almost, I'm just trying to think right now, was almost 3 years. And so, so I would say, and I was early, so it was okay and it worked out for me. And I was also still working, I was back consulting and doing this at the same time in the early days. But what I would say is find people in your industry. I didn't know how to find anybody in the industry. The industry is much bigger now, and there's tons of indie brands. There's tons of small brands. We're flooded with smaller brands. There was no Instagram at the time. You couldn't have reached. I couldn't have found a founder. I couldn't have found the founder of Mac and been like, "Hey, can you talk with me?"
Do you
the
get
way
those
that
requests?
You can with social media.
I'm thinking
tons.
to start some.
Probably.
Yeah.
Maybe what a week.
Say, hey, I want to start something and I'd like to learn.
Yeah. I want to start something. I get I want to start a skincare brand. I want to start a cosmetic brand. I would love your advice. I'm new. I'm thinking of starting for sure. And that wasn't, LinkedIn was a thing back then, but so I think it would be to accelerate the path. I'm glad the way that I did it because we have really robust formulations. We clinically tested them really early on. We had done, because in my head, both my strategic and marketing head, I was we worked with Ayurvedic doctors in India. Check. Now it's solid. We worked. We worked with pharma chemists, solid. I was checking off those boxes, but what I recognize now as I see founders is that, they're quickly saying, oh, I'm going to find a cosmetic chemist, and now there's all these resources. The beauty independent didn't exist, back then. All these resources and industry things are now there. So, but I jumped in 2 feet first, and I think if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have done this at all. I think if you don't just make things.
And I think that goes back to these things are said in different ways. The thing you hear is the just start. Mm-hmm. And talking to founders, I've seen that just start approach in I made it at home in a mug to I just created something at home and then had my friends try it. And it's more of basically that what you're saying, which is now with access to information, with access to people, with access to founders, just do the damn thing and start. And it's not going to look cute. It's not going to look perfect. And I mean, that to me is translatable across anything that you're starting. That's really valuable to hear that. And especially, like I said, at this time of year where people, a lot of us have these I want to do this, but, and the list of buts is so long.
Yes. And it's and I need to do this first and I need to make this it's no, just do it. And then, because also it's partially the fear and the discomfort of all of a sudden not having stability.
So let's fast forward a bit. So Sahajit, by the way, congratulations on the mention in Oprah magazine. That's no small thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
I assume that really kind of, further validation. As entrepreneurs, we're doing what we're doing, but those kinds of little wins, you need those.
You need the bad about. Oh, Well, because also when you work, and I know you've had this experience before, when you're working in an environment, you have your boss or your manager to be like, great job, like, great job. Yeah, those
So let's
are
fast
great
forward.
job.
You're now Sahajan, multiple, product lines in, multiple, different, I'm not using the right words because I'm not as much of a beauty person. So I'm going to say this in just a layperson way. You've got skincare and then you've got, lip balms. You've got, within skincare, like really a nice, multiple step process and all of this. Now, I'm assuming the problem, or the challenge is a better way to word it, switches from, I'm trying to figure out how to start to now I'm trying to figure out how to manage. Because at this point, family, and I think something we're all dealing with as we get older, parents, making sure they're in good health and life and partner and all of this. So where you are right now with, I assume, growing the business, and I have a bit of an inside track to that, to knowing that that's, you're scaling the business as any founder would do. Let's talk a bit about that piece, because I think there's, in the conversations we've had, and I don't know if there was one that we had over a dinner where, I don't know if you're okay to share this, so I'll re-ask the question, where I remember over the dinner you were asked, like, you've got a full plate. You're managing a successful business. You've got, all the different elements that so many of us founders and women do. And how do you manage it all? And there was something you said that I don't know if you remember. And if you don't, I hope it's okay for me to say it. But if you could answer that question, how do you manage it all?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't know what I said.
Yeah, can I say
I'm
it?
curious.
Okay,
Can I ask you, was it
You
inappropriate?
said in your you always got a calm tone in the way you speak. And you said, I cry a lot. And then we went on to an entire conversation about emotional regulation and the importance of emotional regulation in this process of being a founder. That's what you said.
Oh my God, is that what I said?
And it's funny because it started a whole conversation that I actually don't think is a bit of an ick, but rather an important one, which is that there's such an ebb and flow as an entrepreneur. And even with the wins, there's the underlying current is keeping all of it afloat. And how the need to have, so like, what are your ways of keeping your emotional regulation in check? What are the things and ways that you do that as a founder?
For sure. So I was probably hopefully I was trying to be cute, when I said that, but there's truth to it. And I think what I would say two things is I don't fundamentally believe in that concept of balance, is that I believe that sometimes life is going to ask more of you and sometimes the job is going to ask more of you. And so we're always kind of going through this, not instability, but really this sort of fluctuation of energy. And the hard part is you only have so much energy. So if you're putting it all in one place, there isn't enough for the next. And so that's what I find to be extremely challenging about all of this. And I think I'm always recalibrating, and I love the beginning of the year because what I do is I go and I reflect on the year that passed. I actually will pull up my calendar and see how I spent my time. And I do, I love to also navigate, so it's nice to write down what went well and what was great and all that kind of stuff, but then also to say what needs to be left behind. And, I've always been one who's always readjusting their routine to try and do it all. Or to try and accomplish as much. And I would say, big things that I'm reinserting for this year is, so this, we lived with my parents for, 15 or 16 months while we were renovating, which is, again, such a Toronto
another thing to add on to the plate.
But another thing to add on to the plate, so it was amazing. And thank God that I have parents that would do that and all of those kinds of things. But all of a sudden, a commute that's usually 15 minutes went from to 45 or an hour, both ways, little things. If we had the kids had an activity, but it was in our neighborhood, they would bring them back to the office and they would sit here until their activity, then there was managing, being in a new space, even though it's my parents, I haven't been there in almost, they had been on their own almost 20 years, because I moved out before I got married. And so, there was a lot, and things that I didn't do very well last year were work out. I'll be candid. And that's always been really, really important. And I process a lot when I'm exercising. I think about a lot. I get joy. I make noise. I let stress out. it's a really, really, it's like therapy for me. It's like, and I haven't been consistent with that. Probably, you know, I ebbed and flowed after having kids, but I was really good before the pandemic, and then it all fell,
how are you looking at that aspect of your life for this year? Like, what are some things you've kind of said to yourself?
So it sounds so boring, but I think one of the biggest things is is being super organized and is calendarizing things. So like I put down, for example, this week, okay, these are the things that I'm going to do. I'm going to do a yoga class while my daughter's at soccer on Monday. And so literally I threw her out of the car and did, you know, yoga for an hour and picked her back up. And then I said, okay, I'm going to do Tuesday and I'm going to do Thursday. And this morning I was like, how am I going to do Thursday? Because I have a big work day planned. And I'm also meeting someone for dinner. So I was like, where's the workout going to fit? So I was like, I guess it's going to have to fit in the morning. Like that's the only way I can do it. But being intentional, I think it's being intentional. And that's something I learned more than once over this journey, like even with the kids. So I know you and I have had, you know, conversations where our sons are the same age, is like I'm very intentional. I'm a list maker, and the first people always at the top of my list are my kids. Like, what do they need? And this week it was just like getting them back to school, but it might even be something as simple as like somebody needs a dentist appointment or somebody needs a new pair of track pants, but it's on my list, because if it doesn't make my list, it doesn't happen. But I think when I also look at that list, it's clear to me what my priority is, because they're the first in the list, and then everything falls after that.
It's a whole separate conversation too about like lists versus what we're seeing a lot of, which is like time management and time blocking. There's a lot of conversation around that.
That's right. Yeah.
AI.
There's a lot of AI.
Like motion, I think, is one that I've been seeing a lot about, and asana, and there's like so many others. In the time we have left, I want to make sure, going back to this time of year where people have had these harboring interests and ideas. You know, you've talked about just start, and the start being imperfect, but just start. And that's something that you would do differently. For those specific to your category, your industry, what are some resources and specific places that you might be able to suggest starting? So are there organizations' websites, places that you might suggest for those specifically interested in beauty, which is a lot of people, whether it's content creator or founder side?
Yeah, for sure. So if it's founder, I would say like the Beauty Independent is a great tool. That didn't exist again when I started. The Beauty Independent is like an industry magazine. I get the newsletter every day, and it talks about indie beauty. So it's like everything from like so-and-so has launched a new brand has emerged doing this. And so it gives you a vibe of what's going on in the industry, but then they'll also do like, what are the trends of 2023? What's happening in M&A? What's happening in VC? Once you're at this stage, there's like almost like you can see there's a stage where some things aren't covered because they're no longer considered indie. But for, I think, brands in my category, that's exactly like if you're new up until, I would say, like you're with retailers, but maybe your retailers are smaller retailers. They do the big announcements like so-and-so's at Target, so-and-so's at Sephora, so-and-so's whatever. That's a great place to start. And then I highly recommend in this world of social media is really reaching out to people who are doing what it is that you want to do. So I've talked to influencers, and I'm sure you have too, who said like, you know, micro influencers, for example, might reach out to somebody who has 100, 200,000 followers and say, could I grab a coffee with you? Could I grab a chat with you? Could you tell me? And those things are so meaningful. And sometimes people are busy, and they, you know, it might take them 2 months or 3 months to lock you in, but maybe narrow down 10 people who you can ask that question to. You're a founder, like nail down. Toronto is actually quite a hub of beauty. I can probably off the top of my head come up with 10 brands, you know, that with really, really cool founders. And so you nail down and ask each of them for a coffee, and maybe 5 of them came through, and maybe 1 was this month and 2 are next month or whatever it is. You would have almost every question answered for you to start.
Which is, I think, another thing of going back to the just start, which really is the theme of, you know, this time of year. It's just feeling like you're in action in the smallest of ways is what keeps you going. And tell me if you feel this way. It's like lodging a little kind of pin in the back of your head going, oh yeah, this is something I still want. This is something I'm still doing. And okay, it's moving at pace, but I'm doing. I'm in the doing.
And if I can also add to that, and I know I'm being mindful of time, but it's like things like Brown Girl Angels or things that also showcase other businesses is when I had this idea, it was, again, this is dating me now, it was almost 10 years ago. And then again, we launched like 3 years in. there weren't as many women entrepreneurs. There certainly weren't very many women of color entrepreneurs. There weren't very many South Asian entrepreneurs, but that has changed on its head. So now it's easier to find and easier to access, but also easier to be inspired by relatable people who are like, oh, they feel like me. Like you and I both grew up in Scarborough. Like what? They grew up in Scarborough and their parents like didn't let them go to jail.
And look at what they're doing now.
We have this in common. And now look at what they're doing, whereas we didn't have that before. So really, like for your community, is like lean into the fact that the world has really changed. Like now the challenge, amongst the brown girl community is like there are so many Ayurvedic brands, there are so many makeup brands, there are so there's plentiful, and so there's lots of people to learn from.
It would be a miss, especially to those from your community, to not talk about what you are currently working on. And within what you can share, of course.
Yeah, so I'm not going to share a lot, actually, because I think the next couple of months will reveal lots of exciting things. New products, new opportunities, new partnerships, and, this is really, I love that we're doing this, and this is really that time. Tomorrow, I'm actually blocking the day. I'm not talking to anybody or anything, and I'm just business planning because it's going to be a good year. And to your point about intentionality, I've also realized if I don't add that part in, if it isn't so meticulously planned, it won't happen. It's like we often think it's our vision that makes things happen. It's actually our habits.
What a great way to end, because I feel like there's just been this revolt, lots of R words, there's been this revolt against the word resolution, and for good reason, because resolution lives at 30,000 feet. But what it really is like the 1 foot ground zero habits, just habits and intention.
Yeah.
And then intention, the habits. And I think there's been a lot of conversation, and it needs to keep happening for people to move away from the resolution into just start small, do, and that's what keeps you going. Thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you.
100%.
And,
thank you.
And before I go, for those who enjoyed this conversation, all of these conversations with the founders are really just an introduction, because as you know, founders are so layered. There's so much to talk about. And one of the things that as you know, with Brown Girl Angels that we really want to talk about is just the exposure to the world of investing, getting investments and all of that. And so there's some stuff we're planning in the next little bit that I'm going to pull Lisa back into, because I know getting funding is a big part of any founder's business. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. 100%.
Have an amazing, intentional day with maybe some deliberate joy thrown in. Take care.
Okay. Sounds perfect.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.